Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to be taking a little bit of a break from the last CPOC content as the next league is approaching for Path of Exile. A lot of people have been asking me to update my BAMA setup from last league, as there's been a lot of buzz around it, specifically because Raiz played it, then Tai put it on his tier list, and a lot of other people have been talking about it. Even Snap is using it for his carry, for his group play setup, and that means that there was a lot of pressure put on me to update my video. Now, I just want to let you guys know that I am not the best at Path of Exile. I view Path of Exile as kind of like a vacation from last epoch content, so I don't necessarily have that many hours to put into it as much as other people do, but I definitely try to pride myself to make decent content, so I went ahead and did a full Exarch Eater run with BAMA, with farming lab, getting my gems, every single little tidbit I possibly could to get you guys a decent league starter build for you guys today. So I just want to also let you know is after this video, after you are done, I would heavily suggest checking out Prexy's videos on BAMA, as they are what I would call the finished endgame versions of the build. This is just simply the way that I would go about league starting it personally, because I don't necessarily like respecking at all. The most efficient way of leveling this build is to simply play a different build until you get access to Blink Arrow of Bombarding clones and Blink Arrow and Mirror Arrow of Prismatic clones. But sadly, due to the way that Transfigure gems work, it is a little annoying to kind of like level as the character. So what I've done is I've gone through and I've tried my best to make a decent leveling setup with, of course, the normal Blink Arrow, Mirror Arrow. Then we farm into Merc Lab until we get the gems that we need, or we can buy the gems that we need with selling other gems that we make in Merc Lab. And then after that, you should be ready to go to dominate the Atlas. So with all that being said, if you haven't already, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, but we're going to get right into it here. All right, so I wanted to put this little tidbit after the intro. This is more of a disclaimer. I want to go with full transparency in saying that, like, I heavily suggest not leveling this way. I heavily suggest not playing around transfigured gems. This is not something you should be doing. This is just simply what I am going to be doing and what I am comfortable with. This character requires you to play a very large amount of Merc Lab to get a little bit of extra currency and to also roll your gems. As Arrow put it, you should not be trusting build guides with transfigured gems. That's why I went out of my way to level as normal BAMA for this character, which, by the way, is not the most efficient way to level at all, by the way. It's very clunky all the way until you get to like Act 4, which is then when it gets significantly less clunky, but it's still clunky. So if you want a much smoother experience, I would suggest just leveling as like a different character, like overall, and just swapping into this in endgame. Like there's a bunch of different options. There's like SRS, like you have so many different options. You could just play that and then swap into this character when you get access to Blink Arrow Bombarding and Mirror Arrow Prismatic clones. But if you want to level as BAMA and play as BAMA the entire time after level 10, this is what you should be watching. Now, of course, like I said, I don't suggest you actually play this setup. This is just simply what I'm going to do. If you follow this and you crash and hard and burn, then I hold no responsibility. Like I'm telling you now, you shouldn't do this, but this is what I am going to do, okay? So the first step is you're going to be grabbing this PoE in the description of the video and load it up, as this is going to be important, as it contains a snapshot of every single progression point of my character while I was leveling. Now there's one down here for passive tree stuff. There's one in the skill gem stuff over here, right here. Then there's also one for items as well. If you are confused, if you don't know what's going on, I would heavily suggest following along with this path of building, as it will help you understand exactly why I did the things that I did while leveling. So the first thing that you're going to be doing when you log into PoE is you're going to be leveling a Mule character on Ranger. You're going to be getting to the prison, which will allow you to have access to Blink Arrow from Tarkley as a quest reward. And at this point in the campaign, you should have access to a transmutation gem and an alteration gem. This will allow you to go to Nessa, buy another copy of Blink Arrow and then use the vendor recipe with an alteration gem in Blink Arrow to turn it into Mirror Arrow. And also as well, while you are here, I would heavily suggest picking up an extra few copies of Momentum and then putting all of your stuff into the stash and then having all of this extra resources for your next character. All right, after getting the ranger done, what you're going to be doing is leveling a witch character to level 10. You're going to be using this passive tree here. And then you're also going to be leveling from levels 1 through 4, probably with Freezing Pulse, once you get access to that. Then at level 4, you can slot in Summon Raging Spirit, and then later on, you can also slot in Summon Phantasm. This, plus all of the minion duration wheel here and all that, will get you all the way to level 10. Now, I'd heavily suggest grabbing this Dexterity here in practical applications, because this is very important for later on. Also as well, I would heavily suggest trying to buy a Jade Amulet from the vendor, as you're going to need all of this extra dexterity to use all these bows that you're going to be using later on. Now after this, you're going to be doing a full swap. You're going to be swapping out your items to a bow. A decent bow with like flat damage would be great. A quiver, of course, right? Any quiver. Then what you can do is go over to skills here. We're going to be using the sniper's mark that we got while being a ranger. Then we also throw on a clarity for mana regeneration. Then we have a blink arrow with momentum, which we got from ranger, and then minion damage support. And then eventually you'd want a mirror arrow, minion damage support, and momentum. At the time, I only had added cold. That works as well, but minion damage would be preferred. Alright, this is what your leveling gameplay is going to look like after the level 10 BAMA swap. So I just want to let you know, technically the most efficient way of leveling this kind of character would be to play something like SRS or something like that, all the way to endgame and then swapping into bombarding clones when you get access to the gems. But if you want to play as the same skill as you're going to be playing in endgame while leveling, right? If you want to do that, then this is the way to go. Now, one of the bigger problems with this build that a lot of people get hung up on when they watch my gameplay, they were like, well, Dread, your clear is kind of garbage with this kind of build. Well, it's kind of a little, misleading. The idea with this build is we're going to be just blinking around, of course, campaign zones. And then as we blink around in campaign zones, the mirror arrow blink arrows actually have enough damage to kill just random mobs while we're running through zones. And that means that as we do this, we gain a passive XP source. So as you can tell in the footage, I'm just running past mobs and letting my blink arrow mirror arrows kill things for me. And then of course, I gain experience, and during the entire leveling process, I had the exact amount of XP I needed the entire time. I was either under-leveled by maybe a level, or I was at the level of the zone, meaning that this is definitely a way to level up. Like I said, not the best way of leveling up, but it's definitely up there in terms of okayness for blink arrow, mirror arrow. So the build actually has a few power spikes, which we're going to be talking about here soon. So the first power spike that I'm talking about is going to be getting access to 2 4 links. Once you get 2 4 links, that's when the power of this build significantly raises. And that is because having access to lesser multiple projectiles in a 4 link. Once you have a 4 link, you can run lesser multiple projectiles, and that infinitely improves your clear to the point where the build actually feels somewhat playable. Now, of course, this is going to be your first slab, so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be choosing Necromancer, right? Then you're going to be grabbing Mistress of Sacrifice. This is very important because not only does it increase the skill effect duration of your blink arrows, right? Your blink arrow characters, right? To the point where you can have multiple up very easily. It also makes it so that you double dip on your flesh offering while leveling, because not only do you get the 23% attack speed while having access to the node over here, spiritual command, you also get access to half of that as extra attack and cast speed, which is great. And of course, extra movement speed, which helps you zoom through the campaign much easier than before. And this is when the first power spike happens, when you get to your first lab. And overall, the character's feeling great at this point. You're just zooming through the campaign. You're just ignoring monsters and running through. Now, the one thing that I do have difficulty on with this build early on is when there's a bunch of monsters on your screen. So like for instance, the Weaver kill on this build is absolutely atrocious. I'm just going to be honest there. The Weaver kill itself is very bad because it takes a while to actually kill the Weaver. Now you can do it deathless. It doesn't like, it's not hard, it's just annoying because it takes a while as you have to keep clearing the trash and then getting to the Weaver, but with persistence you can kill it and be just fine. Now, just to give you a little bit more context of what the build looks like while leveling, here is an Act 4 kill of Daresso with the Blink Arrow Mirror Arrow character, right? This is after our first lab. We're going to just be killing Daresso here. As you can tell, the damage for single target is through the roof once we grab Mistress of Sacrifice, because that, on top of all the skill effect duration that we grab on the tree, means that we can have well over 6 BAMAs while leveling. This is enough to delete most single targets very easily, which is cool, as it makes it so that leveling is very buttery smooth with this character. As you can tell, with all this extra duration, with all these extra minions, the build will feel significantly better, and it just gets better from here. All right, this is when the build really comes online, and that is the big power spike. What is that? Well, there's 3 reasons why we hit a huge power spike in Act 4 and Act 5. That is because we get access to items like a penetrating shot quiver. So if you don't know, BAMA, they use your bow and your quiver. This means that you can actually pierce additional targets, right? Getting that extra pierce means our clear like significantly gets better, as we don't need to run the pierce gem to get that extra pierce. So even if it's a white penetrating shot quiver, doesn't matter. Getting a penetrating shot quiver is very important for this character's progression, and I would heavily suggest grabbing that as soon as possible when you could put it on at around level 25. Another part of the progression that makes the build feel much better is, of course, getting access to greater multiple projectiles. This means instead of shooting 3 projectiles, you shoot 5. This, on top of course, having access to the penetrated shot quiver, makes your clear good enough to actually do the rest of the campaign and get all the way to maps. And then at that point, you can just farm Merc Lab and stuff like that, right? Now, what I would suggest is for a single target, of course, to do a gem swap where you swap out of GMP and then swap into something like Momentum or Added Cold. Either way, mainly Momentum is actually one of your best gems, by the way, early on. But yeah, swapping this out for like Added Cold or Momentum, it depends on your gear and links. So like, for instance, I had Added Lightning here. Either Added Lightning works here or Momentum. Either way, both work. It's just I had different colors for my links, obviously, which is nice that you have a little bit of variability when it comes to your links, right? That's the second thing that is a big power spike. The last thing that gives you a huge, and I mean huge, ungodly power spike is having access to the Bow Mastery here for Blink and Mirror Arrows have 100% cooldown recovery rate. This means that you essentially spit out Blink Arrow Mirror Arrows at twice the speed, meaning that you can puke like a bunch of them out very quickly while also having a very large duration on them, meaning that you can clear maps much easier, well, clear like campaign zones much easier with the GMP, the penetrating shot. And this is when I would call BAMA to become a quote unquote real build. If you were to play something else and then respec it at this point, that would be somewhat of a valid option. The only problem with that kind of ideology is look at the passive tree currently. There's not many other builds that could push this far with this kind of passive tree other than maybe like elemental hit totems, but like even then that's like a completely different build. So like that's the biggest problem with leveling as a build like this, like BAMA, is mainly because your passive tree is completely different than other people's passive trees. To give you an idea of what this power spike looks like, here is an Act 5 Kitava with the increased cooldown recovery rate and of course all of the extra damage that we get and the duration. As you can tell, we're absolutely deleting this Kitava very easily as we have a lot of single target because we are a BAMA setup. Now of course, each of these clones, when we do the gem swaps, we can have greater multiple projectiles as well, which means our clear is not bad at all. That means that we can just simply zoom around in the campaign without too much effort and just ignore monsters and just focus on getting through campaign zones, which is mainly what I do with this character while leveling. Now, after this point, your character is pretty solved for a very long time, all the way from level 40 to level like 63. That is when you want to be doing the Eldritch Battery Transition. What does this mean? Well, what we're going to be doing early on, we just have Purity of the Elements on our bar, but eventually we want to add Wrath, as Wrath and Grace are a very large damage option for us. So like Grace for defensive layers early on, you can either use Grace or Determination depending on how comfortable you are. I like using Grace early on and then using Determination later on, but Grace early on is definitely an option. And of course, there's also Wrath. What does this mean with Eldritch Battery? So we grab Eldritch Battery up here, and then we make sure to grab a chest with a decent amount of energy shield on it. So right here, we have like 109 energy shield, and we have energy shield everywhere else. And that means we have 259 energy shield. And this means that we can actually play the video game properly, right? It means that we can actually have a Wrath aura and a Purity of Elements aura, and that gives us a lot of extra damage and a lot of extra juice, as giving our minions all that although that flat lightning damage is very good for us, right? And this is where, well, like one of the first transitions of the character, mainly making sure you get some energy shield and then swapping into Eldritch Battery. So this is where the fun part begins. You're going to be getting to Act 10 with this setup, right? Almost finishing the campaign, and then you're going to hard stop once you get access to the staff before you go and fight Kitava. This is because what you're going to do is you're going to go and do your Cruel and your Merc lab. This will give you access to stuff like Mindless Aggression and then eventually Bone Barrier. Now, in my POB, I grabbed Commander of Darkness. That is because this leveling setup was done before 1.0, but instead of Commander of Darkness in my POB, I would heavily suggest grabbing Bone Barrier instead for your Merc Lab, as this is going to give you a lot of extra sustain and physical damage reduction. This is going to make you feel significantly tankier than I did during my Exarch Eater run, so you're going to have a much better time than I will, like ever will. This is also when we're going to be grabbing a Divine Blessing setup with Wrath. We do Divine Blessing on Wrath, right? Meaning that we can actually have a third aura, which is when we put in the Grace from Purity of Elements, and then Grace, then Wrath, right? Those are 3 auras currently. And this is where it gets interesting, okay? You're going to do your Merc in your Cruel Lab. Then you're going to farm Lab with gems until you get a Blink Arrow Bombarding Clones and a Prismatic Clone, Mirror Arrow of Prismatic Clones. Why is that important? Well, these are the gems that will let you zoom through white maps, yellow maps, and red maps. These gems are generally just overtuned, in my opinion. They do a lot of damage. They're very good. They have really good clear, and the build feels awful without them. At least in maps. So I would not suggest playing Blink Arrow, Mirror Arrow into maps with the normal setup. Now with the, bombarding and of course the prismatic clones, I would definitely suggest doing so. Now, what does that mean? That means that you need to do Merc Lab runs. You need to keep doing Merc Lab over and over again. Now, in your inventory, make sure that you have access to a bunch of copies of Blink Arrow in your inventory to have the 10% chance to turn your gem into a gem of the same type, right? That will allow you to change the Blink Arrow gem into either one of Bombarding and Prismatic, and then you also can put in regular random green gems, right? And try to roll the Gamba for Blink Arrow Bombarding or Mirror Arrow of Prismatic. These gems are probably going to end up being expensive, by the way. I just want to let you know that. That's why leveling as this setup is probably not the most efficient thing ever, because there's going to be a lot of people aiming for these gems. So it might actually just be better to play a different build and then swap into this character later on. But this is how you play as Blink Arrow, Mirror Arrow from level 1 level 10 all the way to, of course, endgame. So you're going to be farming Merc Lab, right, for Blink Arrow Bombarding Clones and Mirror Arrow Prismatic Clones, okay? Now, as you do this, I have prepared a list of gems that might be worth your time to snag and then sell. So either you are going to just get lucky and get Mirror Arrow of Prismatic Clones and Blink Arrow Bombarding Clones, or you are going to have a bunch of different gems to sell to the market. Make sure that you price check these. You're going to be able to sell these to the market and then buy your own Blink Arrow Bombarding Clones or Mirror Arrow Prismatic Clones. Now, of course, if you're an SSF, guess what? You get to play some more, do some more Merc Lab. Now, it took me 9 runs to get all the gems that I need, the Blink Arrow Bombarding and Mirror Arrow Prismatic. Now, a little trick here, okay, is if you get Blink Arrow of Bombarding and then Mirror Arrow, and then like Blink Arrow of Prismatic clones, right? You get 2 Blink Arrows, which would be bad for you. You can actually use that same alteration recipe that you used in Act 1, right? For, your Blink Arrow, Mirror Arrow. You can use the same one to swap Mirror Arrow, Blink Arrow, right? For Mirror Arrow, Prismatic, and Bombarding. Meaning that if you get 2 of the same, it's okay, you're in luck, you'll be fine. Now, of course, if you get a Mirror Arrow of Prismatic clones and then Blink Arrow of Prismatic clones, that's going to be a little iffy. But thankfully, it seems like these builds are actually going to be popping off for this league. So that means that if you get extras, you can just sell them and then buy the other one, right? So you are sadly going to be in what I call Merc Lab Purgatory until you get this set up. But once you get this set up, this PoB, we're going to be swapping out some gems and grabbing fresh meat because that's going to give you a lot of base critical strike chance because of our duration scaling, gives them adrenaline, gives them crit multi, right? We're going to be changing our tree a little bit to reflect this, grabbing all the crit multi here, grabbing the accuracy mastery, the minion leech mastery, and stuff like that. That all combined will lead you to being ready for maps. All right, so this is going to be gameplay of the first map that I did with Blink Arrow Bombarding clones, and then of course Mirror Arrow of Prismatic clones. So while we're here, let's talk about Mirror Arrow of Prismatic clones, or Prismatic clones in general. So when Affliction started, we were very mixed on Prismatic clones. Why were we mixed on Prismatic clones? Well, that is because we did not have any information on them, and we also didn't have any damage numbers for them in PoB for like a week or so. That meant that I had no idea of how to actually scale these things and how to play with them properly, right? Now, thankfully, some astute viewers were actually able to look into the PoEDB and find the numbers, but essentially, Prismatic clones have a 400% added damage effectiveness. That is insane. That brings them almost to, that brings them a little bit more single target DPS than the Bombarding clone specifically. That means that we can actually focus on only running Prismatic clones and Bombarding clones, meaning that we benefit from fresh meat much more than the old version where I was using the normal clones for extra single target, right? The Prismatic clones are significantly better for single target than I originally thought because we didn't have access to any of the information. Oops, right? Now, it doesn't work like normal elemental hit, but they are prismatic skills, the Mirror Arrow, Blink Arrow, Prismatic clones. This means that you can use stuff like combat focus, which is something that I do very soon here. So, listen up. This is very, very, very important. This is ungodly important, okay? This is the most important part of the entire video. This is the elemental equilibrium change. The transition. So what do I mean by that? There is a node all the way down here by our Blink Arrow, Mirror Arrow cooldown that is called Elemental Equilibrium. The way this works is hits that deal elemental damage, remove exposure to those elements, and inflict exposure to other elements. Exposure inflicted this way applies an additional negative 25% resistance. So I believe normal exposure is like 10% negative res or 15%. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember, but we're dealing a massive amount of extra damage because of this negative resistance on top of our curses and stuff like that, right? Well, this is very important for damage scaling at endgame. That's why on our bow here, we only have 2 elements. So here we have a bow with added flat fire and added flat cold. This means that our elemental equilibrium needs to be a lightning skill. So minion skills do not trigger EE, so, right? So our blink arrows and mirror arrows do not trigger this, but we can trigger it, meaning we can attack an enemy and apply a lightning hit and then give the enemy negative cold and fire resistances, right? That's very important. So in our skills here, we actually, on our Arcanist brand link, we have a Shock Nova. This is mainly to apply a lightning damage hit, right, to the enemy and then apply elemental equilibrium. Now, this is very important to understand because we also run something called generosity on our anger setup. This means that anger can actually brick your EE setup if you're not careful, because if you are adding extra flat fire damage to spells, right, which this would do to you, right? That would mean that your Shock Nova would apply fire and lightning damage. So you need to make sure that your anger has generosity on it so that it does not affect you, so that you are only dealing lightning damage with your Shock Nova. So that's the first few things that you need to know about elemental equilibrium. Now, this setup is very, very easy to set up, mainly because you don't need a insane bow, like, at all. Like, you need like a decent bow. What do I mean by that? Well, with the way that EE works, you can do either fire cold, fire lightning, or cold lightning. You do not have to focus on one of these. It just depends on what bow you get. So if you look at your bow here, if you get, let's say, lightning damage, cold damage, then you'd run in Wrath Aura instead of Anger, and then you would run, instead of this, where is it? Instead of the Shock Nova, you'd run something like Purifying Flame, right? But and then if you ran cold and lightning, you would run like if you ran like lightning, like fire lightning, you would run a cold spell like Eye of Winter, right? So it's very, very easy to get set up with this. You just need a bow with 2 very high elemental damage rolls, and make sure that your bow does not have any extra added lightning. Make sure your quiver doesn't have any extra added, like, of the flat that you're getting the elemental equilibrium set up on, right? You just need to make sure of that so that you're not proccing your EE. Now, of course, that's really good, right? That is really good. That's cool. Now, also another thing, people are going to ask me, Dread, why are you not running a triple LE setup? You can technically run it with this setup. Well, the problem is when you use your blink arrow, mirror arrow, there's actually a hit portion to said skill. So here, as you can tell, we actually do damage with the skill, right? Here, that means that we can actually accidentally trigger EE on enemies with our blink arrow, mirror arrow if we are not careful, meaning that I have just gone with the approach of just doing a double elemental setup, which is much easier to handle and you don't have to worry about accidentally touching the enemy. But if you feel like as though you can do fine with that, you can actually go try Ellie and still get a decent extra amount of damage from this, but be careful, be warned, you might accidentally screw it up. Now, one thing as well, what's really cool is if we look over at the prismatic clones, where is it? The mirror arrow prismatic clones, it's a prismatic skill. So it'll choose lightning, fire, cold, but we can actually make a combat focus here, right here. So we can make a combat focus, right? Now, if we have a total of 40 dex in strength and radius, either 40 dex in strength or 40 strength, right? It will make it so it cannot choose lightning, right? And of course we deal like 50% less lightning damage, yada, yada, yada. This means that our prismatic clones only deal fire and cold. This means that the base damage that deal are like in the fizz damage that gets converted. So the way that this works is it converts the fizz damage, I believe, from the prismatic clones. I think it's that way. I'm not entirely sure, but I think what it does is it converts that fizz damage that's on our bow into either fire, lightning, or cold based on prismatic. And then of course, if we run this thing here, the combat focus, we actually end up with more damage, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the way it goes. I'm not entirely sure about that. If I'm wrong, please let me know down below. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. But yeah, that's the EE transition. This is very important to understand. Otherwise, you can very easily brick your own damage with this setup. All right, so this is footage of my first Eater kill on the character. So the Eater kill, I almost did deathless. I died a few times at the end because I didn't see the big massive tentacles in my face. That was my fault. But this build is significantly squishier in the footage than you will have in game. That is because I currently don't have the leech from, of course, the Necromancer new bone barrier, right? This leech is going to be insanely strong. So if you see in my POBs, you'll see that I did not grab bone barrier. That is because it was not updated until, of course, this patch, which is going to be after this character was made, right? So this character is going to be significantly tankier because of that. So I just want to let you guys know that. So the Eater fight was significantly easier on shitty gear. Now the Exarch fight, on the other hand, was a little annoying. I actually died, I think, like 4 times because I'll be honest, I kind of suck at the fight. Also as well, you got the balls. And even with 3.8k life, it was a little sketchy. And that is mainly because I had no physical damage reduction because I did not have access to bone barrier. I also don't have access to the automation steel skin setup, which we'll have access to next patch. And I also don't have access to like Enduring Cry plus the War Cry stuff, meaning that I am essentially on super duper hard mode with the footage that you're seeing right now, meaning that like I am as squishy as you will ever be. At this point now, actually, Eater Exarch runs have been nerfed a little bit. You don't have access to stuff like Wandering Path anymore to boost your progression, meaning that you're not going to get to Eater and Exarch that early in the progression anymore, meaning that you're actually going to have significantly better gear when you fight Eater and Exarch, which is actually a buff, like for most people anyways that aren't going the speed of light, right? But for Eater Exarch runs, it's going to be much slower. So I just want to let you guys know that like this gameplay is the bare minimum, like the shittiest of gear. It's like SSF like light, because it's actually worse than SSF because I dropped a Cloak of Flames, which would have given me some fizz damage reduction, which would have made me significantly tankier, but I didn't use it because I wanted, for the sake of simulation, I did not use a Cloak of Flame. I also dropped 2 5 links I could have used as well, which would have sped up this gameplay significantly, but I decided not to use them for, like I said, the sake of course, simulation. So, like I said, this is on the shittiest of gear you possibly can do, and we still end up killing Eater in like, I don't know, like what is it, like 3-ish minutes, and then we kill Exarch in like 5, and that's just because I suck at the Exarch fight and I died a few times. All right, now with all of that leveling, it brings us to here, which is my current plan setup for Blink Arrow Mirror Arrow Necromancer. So this is about, I'm going to say like the end of day 1, day 2 of the character in Trade League. So there's going to be a few things that we buy, a few things that we prioritize. So let's go into that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to run our Uber Lab and get access to Commander of Darkness and of course Bone Barrier. That's going to give us a lot of leech. I did not have access to this in my Exarch Eater run. This will make you significantly tankier. This means that you can actually drop nodes like Infused Flesh over here. You can drop all of this extra reservation efficiency, which means you don't have to run the Vitality Aura that I was running, right? Use it at your own discretion. And you also get to grab some extra suppression and try to get a decent amount of suppression. That will make you significantly tankier, right? Some other things that you want to be focusing on after this character is getting access to cluster jewels, mainly one minion life cluster jewel with Blessed Rebirth. You can even alteration spam into this. All we care about is this specific node, Blessed Rebirth. Minions created recently cannot be damaged. This means that when we put down a Blink Arrow Mirror Arrow, they cannot be damaged for 4 seconds, which means in really sketchy situations like the middle of rituals, legion, stuff like that, your minions won't instantly die, because eventually you're going to be doing content where minions will die much quicker than normal, which means that you need to essentially just give your minions God mode. This will make bossing much easier, do all your pinnacle bosses much easier, stuff like that. And the other jewel that you're going to be grabbing is, of course, Enduring Composure. This is going to give you a lot of extra armor, which we do swap to Determination, by the way, once we get to this point. And we also gain endurance charges to give us a lot of more physical max hit. Now, this is my physical max hit without steel skin up, obviously. And I went and tested and I went and checked. We are not going to be able to run a Enduring Cry with the War Cry Call to Arms thing, but we can run a steel skin on automation, which will be a lot of extra chunk. And of course, we grab the cluster jewel here for endurance charges. Those are the things on the passive tree that we focus on. Now for gearing, of course, eventually get a much better bow. I didn't swap the bow here. This is really shitty, like day 1 off the ground bow. We want to prioritize something like Ancient Skull. This is going to give us a lot of extra critical strike chance and also attack speed for our minions. The Whispers is just a bunch of extra attack speed, and it'll make it so your minions take their damage as chaos. I mean, HP as chaos, which doesn't really matter to us at all, to be honest. But that's a lot of extra crit chance, and it's a lot of extra attack and cast speed. This is a very large amount of damage, lots of damage. You don't have to actually have power charges, by the way. You don't have to have like power charges on your character. Like, I don't need power charges. You just simply need to have them allocated. Eventually you can allocate this other power charge for extra damage, like other power charges, and you can eventually like get like a +1 power charge on the helmet eventually if you're like rich or whatever. But yeah, Ancient Skull, power chart scaling. This is really good. You don't need it, but it's really good. It is like probably one of the better items to be using on this character. Cloak of Flame as well. Even if it's a 4-link Cloak of Flame, doesn't matter. This gives us a lot of extra Fizzmax hit. This is the main way of getting a lot of Fizzmax hit on like a witch character. It just makes it so that 40% of our physical damage is taken as fire, which means, of course, we don't take as big of fizz hits anymore. This on top of the armor scaling from Determination that we swap into, and of course the endurance charges, means that we don't instantly fall over. Also, as well, what's really cool about Cloak of Flame, if you don't know, you can actually grab the 15% increased maximum life if there are no life modifiers on equipped body armor. This gives us a decent amount of max life as well. We're sitting at like, where is it, 4.2k, which is nice at this setup. This is with my shitty SSF found gear plus a Cloak of Flame plus an Ancient Skull on top of that, right? Those are the main things we care about. Another thing that we can do is we can get a decent dex amulet, because one of the biggest problems with this build is we're going to be very dex starved, right? But we can anoint Fearsome Force over here eventually, which means that we can dump some points here. We can dump some points like everywhere else, which means that we can actually anoint Fearsome Force on our amulet, and then that'll save us some passive points. Then, of course, other than that, just get some jewel. Mainly, you want accuracy. So one of the biggest problems with damage on this build is we look over here. You want to make sure that your minions have a decent chance to hit, right? So if we go over items, the first way of doing that is to make sure you have a quiver with accuracy on it. That is the first thing that you want to do. Make sure you have a quiver of accuracy on it. That will boost your damage significantly in the end game. Make sure that you grab stuff like the accuracy rating off of minion offensive mastery, and you also can get Ghastly Eye Jewels with accuracy rating, which will actually boost your accuracy rating as well. And then eventually, once you get enough points, reservation and stuff like that, you can actually run, you can actually afford to run a precision aura, which will actually give you extra crit chance and accuracy for your minions. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the full POB. Now, at this point, once you get to this character, you can just go for some 6 links, right? So if you look over here, Bombarding, but you like go for a 6 link here and then 6 link for Prismatic, we can get well over 4.7 million DPS very easily on this really shitty gear setup that I have. You can run minion gems and stuff like that. Now, after this, after you reach this point, what I'm going to do is down below, I'm going to link the finished build showcase of the Blink Arrow character that I did. Now, this version is a little flawed, mainly because we're utilizing charms for extra mana reservation efficiency, but it's a good video for you to watch. I'm also going to be linking some videos for from Prexy. Prexy, he is actually the originator of BAMA. He plays a very large amount of BAMA builds. Like, he wasn't the first one to play BAMA, but he's definitely the first one to like focus on BAMA. I started playing BAMA back in Sanctum League as my Sanctum farmer, and I copied his stuff to play BAMA, right? He is the BAMA guy. He is the guy who does the really ridiculous, expensive BAMA setups to do a large amount of damage to enemies and do like very large amounts of uber boss damage, right? He's the person to look at for endgame BAMA setups. This is simply the build that I'm probably going to take on my first week of play of the next league, finish it out, and then go to the next build. Which, by the way, if you want to see updates on this build, I'm going to be making updates on the build on extra few days, right? So if you want to like keep in tune for that, just be ready for that. I'll probably have a finished showcase of this character once I'm actually done with it in the next league. Now, with all that being said, this has been Dread. Make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. Bye, guys.